So welcome. I'm Liz Ryan. I am the adult programming coordinator for the Derry Public Library. This is the second program of October this month. The first was on Monday. It was my tour through the subgenres of horror. We do have a few other events this month. Next Wednesday, we're going to have a program on the New Hampshire primary. Just in time for election season, the general election, we're going to go back to where it all began earlier this year. If you can imagine, it seems so far away back when we were all, early February and voting in person. On the 19th, we're going to have a program about maximizing your Social Security benefits. And on the 21st, we are going to have a program on wild edibles in your own backyard. So if you're a forager or just interested in what can you eat within the general vicinity of your house, this is the program for you. Without further ado, I will give it up to our performer, Davis Bates.
Thank you. Thank you. This program is called Halloween Harvest, and I'm going to start with a song I actually learned on the Hudson River sloop Clearwater. It's a boat that goes up and down the Hudson River doing environmental education, and they have a thing they call the pumpkin sale. And it started in Albany in the early part of October and winded down to New York City around Halloween time. And people would volunteer on the crew, and we'd have festivals on the shore of the river, and school kids that come on in the week would take tours of the boat, and we would sell pumpkins. We'd corral them on the boat, because when you're on a boat and it tilts, pumpkins can get a little rowdy and they roll. And if they don't have something to hold them in, they roll off the boat, and then you have to go in the river and fish them out. So we'd build this corral out of fish nets, and we'd store the pumpkins there. And somebody taught me this great Halloween song. It's a zipper song. Not that it's about zippers. You just change it a little bit by zipping words in and out. The song goes like this. Hi-ho, it's Halloween when the pumpkins all are seen, rolling up and down the street. Hi-ho, it's Halloween. That's pretty easy. It's fairly simple. And the best way to learn a song is to sing it with me. Now, this is folk music. There's no such thing as a wrong note, so don't worry about this too hard. We'll just sing that. Ready? Here we go. Hi-ho, it's Halloween when the pumpkins all are seen, rolling up and down the street. Hi-ho, it's Halloween. And the way it works, you zip a word out and zip another word in. For example, zip pumpkins out. Zip something else in. You might see at Halloween. Often people will say ghosts. And then the question is, how would ghosts move up and down the street? They wouldn't roll like pumpkins. And most often people say float. So let's do ghosts floating up and down the street. Okay. Here it goes. Hi-ho, it's Halloween when the ghosts all are seen, floating up and down the street. Hi-ho, it's Halloween. And then often you'll get kids coming up with ideas like trick-or-treaters, one kid said. And I said, okay, how would trick-or-treaters move up and down the street? And this boy, I think he was about 5 or 6, his eyes got really wide and he looked at me, he said, sugaring. Made a lot of sense, actually. So let's do trick-or-treaters sugaring up and down the street. Hi-ho, it's Halloween when trick-or-treaters all are seen, sugaring up and down the street. Hi-ho, it's Halloween. And then, of course, people would say witches, and often they say flying on broomsticks up and down the street, which is an okay image. But you see, I have some friends who are witches, and their favorite way, they tell me, to move up and down the street is to dance. Oh. So we're going to do witches dancing up and down the street. Hi-ho, it's Halloween when the witches all are seen, dancing up and down the street. Hi-ho, it's Halloween. And let's go back to pump. You know how it goes now, right? You've heard it once. You could probably sing it and put anything you wanted to zip in and out. Okay. A long time ago when Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles were in, try fitting that in that song. Folk kids would come up with that. It was very hard to do. But let's go back to pumpkins one last time. Ready?
All right.
Hi-ho, when the pumpkins all are seen, rolling up and down the street. Hi-ho, it's Halloween. And that's the song. That's the song. It's a great little song. We also sang another song on board there. We took an old sea shanty, and when we would toss pumpkins to each other from the truck to the boat, the sea shanty had different words, but we did it about pumpkins. We'll roll the old pumpkins along, we'll roll the old pumpkins along. And sometimes when you're tossing, you're supposed to toss and look in the eyes of the person you're going to toss to make sure they're looking at you. But you're tossing about 500 pumpkins and you get out of sync sometimes and you miss the pumpkin and it lands on the ground and it cracks, and you can't sell a cracked pumpkin to somebody, but you can use it to cook with. So on pumpkin sale, we not only tossed pumpkins, we ate a lot of pumpkins. And you'd sing, a little bit of soup, it wouldn't do us any harm. A little bit of soup, it wouldn't do us any harm. Or a little bit of pie, it wouldn't do us any harm. A little bit of pie, it wouldn't do us any harm. That's the way it is with folk songs. You can change them. And the tradition of Halloween has changed over the years too. I don't know how much you know about it. I did some research about it myself, and it's a really, really old holiday.
Oh, yeah.
People look at me and they say I'm getting old, but I'm not as old as Halloween. And there was a part of the tradition of Samhain's Day way back when, that there was a belief that the spirits of all those people who had died in that year would come up for one last time to visit the places they loved. And then they go on to the afterlife. And there was a belief that on that one night, you could hear the spirits talk. If you sat on a three-legged stool at an intersection where three roads met, you could hear the spirits talk, and they tell the future as they whispered and went by you. It would be hard to do now because of cars, but in those days there weren't any cars. Or you could tell the future by taking an apple. My grandmother was really good at this, not telling the future, but peeling apples. She could peel an apple in one long continuous peel around. So you got this big coil, sort of like those paper strips you make and hang in the window. And you could take that coil and toss it over your shoulder. And when it landed, if you looked at it, it would spell the initials of the person you were going to marry, according to the tradition. And if you looked at it and you didn't like those initials, you could have another try, pick it up and do it again. But if it was the same 3 times in a row, you were stuck. You were stuck. And then people started dressing up as spirits and going from house to house, shouting, we're spirits, and begging food. And then that became eventually trick-or-treating, which I loved when I was a kid. I loved trick-or-treating. I first started doing in Pittsfield, Massachusetts. And every Halloween, I don't know if you remember the first thing you ever wore for Halloween. It may have been something somebody told you were because you were too young to remember what they dressed you up as.
I'm pretty sure I was a clown at some point.
You were a clown? Yeah. You know what I was? I was Zorro.
Ooh.
Every Halloween, I was Zorro. Zorro, when I came home from school in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, where I live, there were 3 shows back to back on TV. There was The Lone Ranger, Robin Hood, and then there was Zorro. And Zorro was my favorite. Zorro, in case you haven't seen him, he's kind of like Robin Hood, only lives in Mexico. Has a black hat, flat black hat, wears a black mask, a big bandana with holes cut out, has a cape, all dressed in black, has a sword, rides a horse. I loved Zorro. So every Halloween I was Zorro. My costume was not exactly like his. My hat was not black, it was not flat. It was an old cowboy hat that my grandparents had given to me, and it was navy blue with white squiggles sewn in it, but it was close enough, so that's what I wore for a hat. And I had a sword, made it myself, a classic kid's sword. My dad taught me how to make it. You take a long stick, a short stick, you put them in a little cross, and then you take a nail and you bang it through and you bend it over and you got a sword. That was my sword. A friend said she was Zorro too when she was growing up, and she would tie a piece of chalk on the end of her sword and go around the neighborhood making the mark of Zorro with the chalk on houses, kids' backs, stop signs. Luckily for my friends and neighbors, I hadn't thought of putting a piece of chalk on the end of my sword. I had a cape. It was about this big, so you can tell how old I was if something that big was a cape to me. And it wasn't black like Zorro's. It was navy blue on one side and green and white checks on the other. It was an old doll's blanket of my mother's that she had when she was a kid. I found it in a box and I put it around my neck, clip it with a clothespin. That was my cape. I had a mask. That was the only thing we bought at the store. You know, those black masks with the elastic around the back. That was my mask. But I did have a pillowcase to collect candy with because we lived in a big neighborhood, a lot of houses close together, and the paper bags you got at the store with the witches, the pumpkins on them, they weren't big enough or strong enough. So almost everybody in the neighborhood used pillowcases. And one year I was all set and I'd gotten ready. I'd gotten my costume together, found the cowboy hat, the mask, the sword had broken the week before. I had to make a new one, but that didn't take long. I clipped the cape around my neck with a clothespin. And then I got the biggest king size pillowcase I could find. And I started to go out the door. And the whole time I've been getting ready, my parents had been standing at the door whispering. And I should have known that meant trouble. Parents start whispering. Often it means trouble for little kids, but I didn't think about this. I was too excited. I started to go out the door. My mother, she stopped me. She said, Davis, you're going to have to wear a raincoat this year. It's raining outside. And I looked at her and I said, no. Yeah, you really do have to wear a raincoat. It's a cold rain. You could get sick. You could still be Zorro. Keep your Zorro costume on. Just wear your raincoat over it. I looked at her and I said, no. I'd seen Zorro on TV. He never wore a raincoat. He was dressed like I was, jumping off of balconies, pouring rain. I had one of those yellow raincoats that buckle up the front with big black buckles and a yellow rain hat that tied under my chin. Zorro wouldn't be caught dead in one of those things, and I knew it. And I said no, and they said yes. And I said no, they said yes. No, you know how it goes, right? Mm-hmm. You ever notice the younger you are, the longer you can do this? I was ready to go on all night. My dad, he got sick of it. He said, come on, stop this yes, no stuff. Come on over here, sit on the couch. I want to tell you a story. And I went over and I sat down the way you do when people who are bigger than you are telling you have to sit down. I sat on the edge of the couch so I could get up in a hurry when it was all over. And my dad, he looked at me and said, you know your grandfather Bates, who lives up in New Harbor, Maine? And I said, yeah, what's that got to do with Zorro? Zorro lives in Mexico. He said, well, you just forget about Zorro for 1 minute. I want to tell you the story your grandfather told me. It happened about 70 years ago. There was a lobsterman up in New Harbor, Maine. He went out fishing for lobsters, traps he made himself. You'd seen them, and I had, nailed together and with little nets coming up into the middle to metal rings and baited with fish, weighted with stone, and push them off the side of the boat and they'd sink down to the bottom. And they had a line coming up to the top that was attached to a buoy, a wooden buoy with a handle on it. And it was painted with his colors, so he knew which buoys and traps were his. Well, my dad said this man, he was out on a very foggy day. That's what my grandfather had told him. And it was a really low tide. And I don't know if this has happened to you. If you've been driving or walking in the fog, you can get lost. You can get turned around in the fog. You can be in a place you've been all your life, but everything seems different. You're walking uphill. It almost feels like you're walking downhill sometimes because of the fog. Well, this man, he's out on the ocean. He got lost. He was right near a rock that was under the surface of the water, but he thought he was somewhere else. And my father, he just finished baiting a trap. He pushed it over his side. He went to gun the motor and he ran his boat full speed right over that rock. Huge hole opened up in the boat. The boat sank like a stone. And that lobsterman said, my dad, like a lot of lobstermen, he couldn't swim. Mm. So he was lost at sea. Well, said my dad, your grandfather told me this too. About 30, 40 years later, there was a young man. He'd been going out with his grandfather since he was about 3, 4 years old, helping his grandfather haul traps. And his grandfather had just retired and given the young man his boat. He was about 17 then. And he only had 100 traps out, but he was going to build up. And he was out on another foggy day, another low tide. And same thing happened to this young man. He was right near that same rock, just under the surface of the water, but he thought he was a good 100 yards away from there. He just finished baiting a trap. He pushed it over the side and he went to gun the motor when out of the mist came an older looking lobster boat. And the man behind the wheel of that boat shouted, hey, to our starboard, there's a rock there. And he turned the wheel and he saw that rock barely missing his boat by inches. And he looked up and he saw that older boat going off into the mist. He could just make out the name on the stern of the boat. It said, the Mary B. First name Mary, last initial B. And that boat was just swallowed up by the fog. Well, this young man, he finished hauling his traps, said my father, and he went into New Harbor to sell the lobsters. And he thought he'd look around for the owner of the Mary B to thank him for saving him from that rock. He knew there was no boat by that name in New Harbor, so he went up to Round Pond, asked around, no boat by that name, and nothing down in Damariscotta either. Couldn't find a boat by that name. And later on that winter, he was sitting around with some of the men in town around a stove, and he told them what had happened. And one of the men said, there used to be a boat named the Mary B out in New Harbor, but she sank. She sank quite some time ago. The lobsterman that owned her, he was drowned. My father, he looked at me sitting next to him on that couch, and he said, it was the ghost of that lobsterman that saved the other lobstermen from drowning. And this year for Halloween, why don't you be the ghost of that lobsterman? And I looked at him and I said, okay. And he said, lobstermen wear yellow raincoats. Yeah, I'd seen them. They're kind of like mine. I took off my cape, I put on my raincoat, buckled up the front. And he said, they wear yellow rain hats too. I said, yeah, I know. I took off my cowboy hat, put on my rain hat, tied it under my chin. And my father said, because he was a ghost, he wore a black mask, just like Zorro. So I got to keep the black mask on, and that year I was the ghost lobsterman. The only year I wasn't Zorro, and I would go to doors and I would knock or ring the doorbell, and people would open the door. I'd hold up my pillowcase and I go, trick or treat, and they look at me and they go, who are you? What's this costume? Who are you supposed to be? So I would tell them the story my dad told me, and they said, hey, pretty good story. Here, I have an extra piece of candy or 2 or 3. So when I came home, I was dragging a soaking wet pillowcase behind me.
Oh.
But it was full of candy. And that candy lasted all the way from that Halloween until the next Halloween. Mostly because my mother put it in a big wooden bowl up on top of the refrigerator where I couldn't get to it without making a lot of noise. Otherwise, it would have been long gone. And the story has lasted even longer than that because I'm still telling it about 60 years later. And at least half of that story is true.
I take it the candy didn't last that long?
No, the candy did kind of last that long. I think my dad made up that story.
Oh, okay.
I actually heard it was based on a true life story about a lobsterman who had a drinking problem. And when you come into New Harbor, actually, there's a pole right in the middle of the mouth of the harbor. And you're supposed to come through on, if you're coming into harbor, you're supposed to come through on the starboard side of it because on the port side, there's a ledge. And this guy had been having a little bit too much to drink. And he said, I'm tired of going on starboard side. I'm going to go on the port side. And full speed, he ran right over that ledge. It took the whole bottom of his boat off, but he was going so fast, the boat didn't sink until it made it all the way to the end of the harbor.
Ooh.
And my dad said that's where he got the idea of that ghost story. So now my brother trick-or-treating, my brother was a train engineer because he was really into trains. Santa Claus brought a train one year. And of course, Santa Claus is really good at setting up things. So we came down and the train was already set up and going around the tree when we came down the stairs. And that year, my brother got a train engineer's outfit, with the suspenders and the cap and the red handkerchief and everything. And it was a little big at first, and then it got too small, and my mother started adding stuff to the suspenders and the bottoms so that it would fit longer. So he would go out as a train engineer. We'd have a train engineer and Zorro going side by side, and often we would sing this. This has nothing to do with Halloween, except we would sing this. Plus, it's a lead into the next song, and it gives me a chance to play these spoons.
Oh.
I, I'm going to give you a short lesson on how to play music with spoons. There's plenty of YouTube videos about this, so you don't have to take notes. You take one spoon, you put it between your thumb and your first finger like this.
Mhm.
The next spoon goes between your first and second finger like that. And then you see the point of that V, you tuck the point of that V into the palm of your hands, right about there. Everybody's hand is different. You may have to adjust for, and the size of the spoons may change it. You close your fist around the spoons, like look like that.
Mhm.
And then you need your knee for this. So I'm going to put my foot up on the table, which you're not normally allowed to do. There. And I'll play the spoons. You tap them on your knee or your hand. You get different sounds depending on what part of your body you tap them on. You can go, put your hand above your knee, go back and forth. Run them across your fingers like this. Sort of the Lone Ranger effect, which dates me again. Then you can combine the different movements and sounds. And you can play music with spoons. The cool thing about spoons, different spoons have different sounds. These I got at Hampshire College. That's where I went to school. And they have a farm there. They're really into composting. So now when you go to reunions and stuff, they give you compostable spoons. Not in your home compost pile, it doesn't get hot enough, but in a big institutional pile that they'll melt down into soil. And your home compost pile will just become twisted spoons, which is kind of cool too. But they have a really neat sound. Yeah, just a pair of plastic spoons. And these are the ones I'm going to use in this song. They're bigger. This is a work song. Cool thing about spoon playing, for a long time, I cut my finger in high school in art class. So if you look, you see it bends in the little finger.
Mhm.
And I wanted to play guitar, but you're not allowed to like have your finger go that way. I did the wrong hand there for a minute. So I never could play along with people in music. I'd sing along, which was great. And then I learned how to play spoons. And at harvest dances, if you can play spoons, you can be part of the rhythm section. This is a work song my dad used to sing to us when we were going to bed at night. Um, we had a tradition of rowdy bedtime songs. Our bedtime was 7:30 till I was in third grade, and we were read books aloud. Some we got out of the library. We had a lot of books at home too, the Wizard of Oz books, the Winnie the Pooh books. And then at 8 o'clock, the lights would go out and my mom or dad would sing to us. And this was part of the rowdy section of songs. The first half would be kind of rowdy, fast, and then the songs would get slower and slower and slower. And hopefully, after about a half an hour, our eyelids would be drooping and we'd be half asleep. Um, this song was sung by Irish American, African American, Chinese American, Italian American, and a whole bunch of other American railroad workers. People can come in this country for hundreds of years, working together, building stuff, not even speaking the same language. In fact, some folks learned English by singing this song. They'd be driving these huge spikes in with 16-pound sledgehammers, and to keep a rhythm going, they'd start to sing. They go, I've been working on the railroad. Now that's how fast they sang, because they didn't want to get tired. My dad at bedtime, he sang it faster than that because he wanted us to get tired. So we'll sing at the speed my dad sang it. I'll play the spoons. You know how it goes. Here we go. Ready? Here we go. I've been working on the railroad all the live long day. I've been working on the railroad just to pass the time away. Can't you hear the whistle blowing? Rise up so early in the morn. Can't you hear the captain shouting? Dinah, blow your horn. We'll go a little faster. Dinah, won't you blow? Dinah, won't you blow? Dinah, won't you blow your horn? Dinah, won't you blow? Dinah, won't you blow? Dinah, won't you blow your horn? Let's whisper. Someone's in the kitchen with Dinah. Someone's in the kitchen, I know. Oh, oh, oh. Someone's in the kitchen with Dinah. Ouch. Strumming on the old banjo and singing beef fight fiddly-I-O. Fee-fi, fiddly-I-o, oh, 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 fee-fi, fiddly-I-o, strumming on the old banjo. That's it.
Oh,
That's it. And if you're having trouble playing spoons,
mhm.
uh, you can actually take, or if you're teaching a kid whose hands aren't quite coordinating it, the spoons are too big for their hand, you can take a pair of spoons and then put a little wedge between them. It could be a rolled up piece of cardboard, a little block of wood, or a
Fork.
little rolled up piece of clay, and then take duct tape. It's another great use for duct tape besides repairing cars. And now they make pink duct tape, which you could tell I'm a little excited about. And you wrap the pink duct tape around the spoons or any color you want. And the tape and the wedge will hold them in position. You can just make a musical instrument, which is kind of cool. Now, that was from the fast bedtime part of the song tradition, but there was a slower song later on that I'd forgotten about until I was looking for songs to sing as part of a Celtic celebration program. And I realized that my dad, when he sang this song, only sang the first two verses at bedtime. He did not sing the third verse. And that's because the third verse made it into a ghost song. And I was scared of the dark when I was a kid, and a ghost song would not be the kind of thing to get me to go to sleep. It would be more like to keep me up all night. And it's a very common song. And you may know the chorus. I may not even have to teach it to you, but it goes. The song goes like this: In Dublin's fair city, where the girls are so pretty, it was there that I first met sweet Molly Malone. She wheeled her wheelbarrow through streets broad and narrow, crying cockles and mussels, alive, alive, oh. And the chorus goes, alive, alive, oh, alive, alive, oh, crying cockles and mussels, alive, alive, oh. She was a fishmonger, and sure 'twas no wonder, 'cause so were her mother and father before. They wheeled their wheelbarrows through streets broad and narrow, crying cockles and mussels, alive, alive, oh. Alive, alive, oh, alive, alive, oh, crying cockles and mussels, alive, alive, oh. She died of a fever, and no one could save her, and that was the end of my Molly Malone. Now her ghost wheels the barrow through streets broad and narrow, crying cockles and mussels, alive, alive, oh. Alive, alive, oh, alive, alive, oh, crying cockles and mussels, alive, alive, oh. And I didn't know till 3 years ago that that was a ghost song. No idea. No idea at all. Hey, ghost stories are something I started collecting a little while back. And I started collecting them around the time someone asked me for a really scary story. I was telling stories around a campfire, and I have this story that I've been telling for a long time. First told it in 1979. It's a shapeshifter story about a woman who changed into a panther and then back again. It's kind of mysterious. I was telling it around a campfire to a bunch of guys later on. It was at DAR Forest. They were camping out for the weekend. And I found out later they were all football players from the local high school football team camping out for the weekend. And I got to the end and they said, oh, that was an okay story. It was fine, but it wasn't really scary. And they said, why don't you tell us a really, really scary story? And one guy said, yeah, like Friday the 13th. This was a while ago. That movie had just come out. And I looked at these guys and I said, well, those movies have bigger budgets than I do. They can do things I can't do. It's just me sitting here and talking to you. And besides, I said, when I was a kid, movies like that could scare the heck out of me. In fact, when I was a kid, the TV show Lassie could scare me.
Oh.
You know that show?
Yes.
Lassie about the dog. Yeah, when I was a
Did you
kid,
fell down the well?
yeah, yeah, Lassie. We would watch that show on Sunday night because Sunday night was the only night my mom did not cook. She'd already made a big meal for after church on Sunday, and she said, "Okay, I've done my stuff for the day. You're on your own." And my dad was responsible for dinner. And he had several things he could cook: waffles, pancakes, scrambled eggs. But more often he'd go out and get like pizza or, Kentucky Fried Chicken. Or sometimes we just do this whole big bowl of popcorn, and we'd have cut up apples and cut up carrots and celery and popcorn for dinner. And we would sit and watch Lassie and the Wonderful World of Color, Walt Disney's Wonderful World of Color. And we'd sit with those TV trays, those ones where they have the metal tray on the top with the painting of some sort on the top of them, and the legs that clip in to hold them up. And I was such a klutz when I was a kid. I would sit there and try and not even breathe because I was so afraid I would knock it over. I'm sitting there one night and I'm watching Lassie and I'm eating popcorn, and Lassie, I was pretty young, 4 or 5 years old, maybe at tops, and Lassie was trapped in a burning building. And I should have known Lassie had to get out of that building because the show's not going to be on next week if Lassie does not get out of that building. But little kids, they don't think that far ahead. I was so scared. I didn't want to watch the end of the show. I just jumped up. My tray went flying. The popcorn went flying. I ran out of the room where the TV was, and I ran into the dining room, and I hid under the dining room table. That was better. I couldn't see it, but I could still hear it from the next room. So I stuck my fingers in my ears, but the TV was up pretty loud because my dad was kind of hard of hearing, and I could still hear it with my fingers in my ears. So I started yelling at the top of my lungs. And that was great. I couldn't see it. I couldn't hear it. I was happy. My parents were not happy. They knew Lassie was going to get out of that building and they wanted me to see it. They came into the dining room. They tried to drag me out from under the table. I'm holding my fingers, so they grabbed hold of my elbows. They started pulling. Come on, it's going to be okay. It's going to, no, no, I don't want to see it. It's going to be okay. Lassie's going to be okay. Come on, you got to see. And they finally got me in the other room. But by then, the show was over. And the Campbell's soup ad came on, that always came on at the end of Lassie. So I didn't get to see Lassie get out of that building. And I didn't half believe that what I was told that they had. So I had nightmares for weeks after that about Lassie being trapped in a burning building. Sometimes with me, sometimes by myself, and I was trapped, and sometimes with my best friend. So if a TV show like that could give me such bad dreams, I told these guys, imagine what some of those movies could do to me. And as I was telling them why I don't really tell scary stories, I suddenly remembered this story my mom had told me. And I said, I don't have any stories like those movies, but I do have a true life ghost story if you want to hear it. And they said, sure. And I told them. I've been telling it ever since. I don't know how my mom came to tell me this. I don't know how it came up. I was probably around junior high school age, 13 or so. And she told me the first time she was ever going to have a baby, she went into labor. And my dad brought her to the hospital down in Manhasset on Long Island. And in those days, the father wasn't allowed to be in the room when the baby was born. They had to wait in another room, walk in circles, get nervous, drink coffee. And my mom was left alone in her hospital room, and the nurse would just come in and check on her every once in a while and see if things got exciting enough to call the doctor in. And the nurse had just left. And the door opened, and into the room walked my father's great aunt Cora, which would have been okay. She'd been a favorite aunt of my dad's, and my mom had liked her too. But you see, they had just been to Aunt Cora's funeral about 5 months earlier. And yet here she was walking into my mom's hospital room, and she came and she stood at the foot of my mom's bed. She held onto that white metal railing that was at the end of it. And she looked at my mom and she said, Nancy, I had to come and warn you. I know something that's going to be awful hard on it. You're going to lose this baby. It's not going to survive the birth. I know how much you've been looking forward to. I know how hard that's going to be, but I know something else that might help. A year from now, you'll give birth to a baby boy. And that boy will be okay. So no matter how hard it gets, remember that. And then the ghost of great Aunt Cora turned and walked out of the room. And my mom, she did lose that baby, and it was hard. But she tried to remember what Aunt Cora had said, and it helped a little bit. And a year later, almost to the day, she gave birth to a baby boy, and that was me. And when she told me this story, she said, "Now don't tell your father I told you this story. He thinks I fell asleep. I had a dream while I was in labor. I fell asleep in labor." And she looked at me and said, "Me, I know when I'm dreaming. That wasn't any dream." And it's a funny thing about ghost stories, you tell one and you often will get a story back. It's like accident stories. If you ever riding your bike and you fell off, you tell somebody about it and they've got a bike riding story. Or you break your arm doing something, somebody tell you about spraining their ankle. Or you have a dream, and you tell somebody about a dream and they'll say, "Oh, I had a dream like that." Ghost stories are like that too. They sort of sprout other stories in their wake. And I've been telling that story for a good 45, almost 50 years now. And I was telling it one time, and I was in high school, and someone said to me, I've got a ghost story like that too. And he told me this. He said, he was about 17 years old. He was an exchange student from Brazil. And it happened when he was about 3 years old. They lived on the outskirts of a big city in Brazil. They had a house that had a nice yard in it and a big stone wall around the house with two gates, one for the car to get in and out, and actually three, a back gate for coming in and out on a path and a front gate for walking in and out. And his mother was shopping. He had a babysitter, and he was by himself out in the yard. It was okay because all the gates were closed with like a giant playpen, and it was childproof. And he was playing this game he called Bump the Gate. He had one of those pedal cars, those cars that you get in and they have little pedals and you make the car go by moving the pedals. And 3 years old is exactly the right age for these cars. And you're getting older when your knees start hitting. And then about 6, you get in, you can't even move in them anymore. They're made for 3 years old. And he made up this game he called Bump the Gate. He put the car right at the front steps of the house. He got in the car and he started pedaling towards the gate as fast as he could. He'd pedal down the path, and he'd go bam into the gate. Then he'd get out, he'd push the car back to the front steps, get back in, go pedal, bam. There's something about 3-year-olds, they have to make up games like this. I don't know if it's to activate their brains or what, but they make up games where they bump into things. And he said about the 6th time he hit the gate, he hit it just right so that the gate vibrated and the latch popped up and the gate swung slowly open. And when he told me the story, he said he could still remember what it felt like 14 years later to watch that gate swing open. Freedom. So he started pedaling out the gate. He started pedaling down the sidewalk, and neighbors would see him and say, "Hey, how you doing? Where's your mom?" And they didn't see his mom, and they turned around to grab him, but by then he was gone because he was fast. He got on this road he'd never been on before. He found this park. Huge park, lots of trees, paths, meadows, and ponds and things. And he'd never been in this park before. The paved paths were perfect for his little car, and he was pedaling along the paths. He came to this hill that went down to a duck pond, and the path went around the duck pond with all these other paths going off from it, and right at the bottom of the hill were a bunch of ducks. So he thought he'd make them fly. It was too steep to pedal. He knew that. He was a smart kid. He put his feet on either side of the car and pushed off on a tree, coasted down through the ducks. They flew across the pond, and he thought he'd make them fly again. He pedaled around the pond, they flew back. He pedaled around, they flew over. Pedaled around, they flew back. He made them fly back and forth about 10, 15 times, and then he got tired of that. He was getting hungry, he wanted to go home, but that hill was too steep to go up, so he thought he'd try another path to get out of the park, and he went around a bunch of trees and a meadow, and then back to the same hill. He came and he went down, and the ducks flew, but that was okay. He wasn't going to make them fly any more than that. He found another path, and on the opposite side of the pond, and he went around and through this side of the park a little bit longer. He came back to the same hill and went down, and one more try. On the left side of the pond, there was another path. He went on that, and around the other side of the park, he came back to the same hill and went down, and then he stopped. And he did what a lot of kids do when they're lost. He just started to cry. And as soon as he started crying, the shadow came over him. And he looked up, and there was this older man. He was dressed in a bowler hat, and he had a vest and a tie and a handlebar mustache and glasses. The man looked at him and said, "You're lost, aren't you?" "Yeah, I can't find my way out of the park." "It is confusing. I know, I know. But you know what? I can take you home. I know where you live. Come on, hey, get up on my shoulders. I'll take your car and you home." And something about this man just made the boy feel safe. And men picked him up, put him on his shoulders, picked up the car, walked right up that hill. In no time at all, they were out at the park and back on his own street, coming in his gate up to the front steps of his house. The man put the car down, got the boy down, put him down, held his hand, knocked on the door. And the babysitter came to the door and said, "Oh, you found him. I've been looking all over for him. Thanks. I was just about to call the police. Come on inside. His mom's going to be home soon. I'm sure she'd like to thank you." And the man looked at her and said, "No, I can't really stay, but say hi for me, will you?" And he patted the boy on the head, and he walked down the path and out the gate, and he was gone. When the mom came home, the babysitter told her what had happened. The mom said, "Who was he? Did he give a name?" Said, "No, he just said to say hi." "Well, describe him for me. I must know him if he said to say hi. What did he look like?" And the babysitter described him, the glasses, the handlebar mustache, that bowler hat, and all. The mom said, wait a minute. And she ran upstairs up to her room, and she came down with a photograph, and she showed it to the babysitter and said, "Is that him? Is that him?" Yeah, that's him. "Who is he?" Mom said, "That's my son's grandfather. He died 3 years before my son was born." And real, true life ghost stories, they're more like those than those movies. Those movies are about making money. And almost every ghost story I ever heard has been about a person or sometimes a dog. And now you've got two you can swap with somebody else. You never know what story you're going to get back. And I don't know if those ghost stories are true. My mom, when I was in college, if I was having a bad day, all of a sudden the phone would ring and my mom would say, "I've been thinking about you. Are you having a bad day?" So if my mom said she saw a ghost, I believe her. The closest time I've gotten, I'll tell you at the end, to a ghost story. That's something that happened to me. But for now, we're going to go to the pumpkin part of Halloween because I have a soft spot in my heart for pumpkin pie, actually. In our family, for Thanksgiving, we have to make 2 pumpkin pies. One is for the Thanksgiving meal, and then the next one is for breakfast the next day, because there's nothing like pumpkin pie and whipped cream for breakfast. Although my son, when he was 3 years old, he said, "Don't give me any whipped cream." And he took a bite of it, and then he said, "You should try it this way. It's really good." And from then on, he ate pumpkin pie, but he never had whipped cream on it. For me, pumpkin pie is, well, it's an excuse for having whipped cream. Some people have whipped cream with their pumpkin pie. I have pumpkin pie with my whipped cream. It's just the way it is. And there's a song, and a friend of mine taught me about pumpkin pie. It's got a longer chorus. The chorus goes like this: pumpkin pie, pumpkin pie. So try that with me. Pumpkin pie, pumpkin pie. And the next line goes, she made a special pumpkin pie. She made a special pumpkin pie. And this part goes, pumpkin pie, pumpkin pie. And you can put your hand up like this, either to celebrate pumpkin pie or to help you at the high note, whatever you need. Pumpkin pie, pumpkin pie. And then the last line is, you never tasted such a pumpkin pie. You never tasted such a pumpkin pie. So we'll string that all together. It comes around a few times. And again, don't worry about getting it right. Hum if it's more comfortable for you. I'll tell you the story in the song, but first we'll do the chorus. Pumpkin pie, pumpkin pie, she made a special pumpkin pie. Pumpkin pie, pumpkin pie, you never tasted such a pumpkin pie. In the West there lived a maid, she was a cook who knew her trade. She baked cookies, cakes, and oh my, she made a very special pumpkin pie. Pumpkin pie, pumpkin pie, she made a special pumpkin pie. Pumpkin pie, pumpkin pie, you never tasted such a pumpkin pie. Now this young cook fell in love with a man. He was a gardener who worked the land. He grew potatoes, beans, and oh my, orange pumpkins 3 feet high. Pumpkin pie, pumpkin pie. She made a special pumpkin pie. Pumpkin pie, pumpkin pie. You never tasted such a pumpkin pie. At the harvest fair, he won the prize for his pumpkin of enormous size. He gave it to the cook to try, and she made a very special pumpkin pie. Pumpkin pie, pumpkin pie. She made a special pumpkin pie. Pumpkin pie, pumpkin pie. You never tasted such a pumpkin pie. She took eggs and milk and some sugar, cinnamon, nutmeg, and some ginger. Special spices she did try to woo the gardener with her pumpkin pie. Pumpkin pie, pumpkin pie. She made a special pumpkin pie. Pumpkin pie, pumpkin pie. You never tasted such a pumpkin pie. After one mouthful, his eyes began to glaze. After 2 mouthfuls, he fell into a daze. My lovely cook, you're the apple of my eye. I'd love to taste some more of your pumpkin pie. Pumpkin pie, pumpkin pie. She made a special pumpkin pie. Pumpkin pie, pumpkin pie. You never tasted such a pumpkin pie. Now the gardener and the cook, they're as happy as can be, living with children 1, 2, 3. They'll be happy until they die, with regular helpings of pumpkin pie, pumpkin pie, pumpkin pie. She made a special pumpkin pie. Pumpkin pie, pumpkin pie. You never tasted such a pumpkin pie. That's the song. And I got time, I think, for one quick song and then a very quick ghost story from my grandfather here. This song, actually, I learned at Hampshire College, and it doesn't so much have anything to do with Halloween, except when you grow watermelon in New England, you get them around the same time you get pumpkins, especially if you're up around Maine. You grow short season watermelon. And this is a song about watermelon.
Oh.
And it reminds me of my grandfather, because my grandfather, my mom's dad, Gramp Allen, he's the one who taught me how to spit watermelon seeds. Now, this is something a lot of parents neglect to teach their children, which is why grandparents come around sometimes. And we were at the kitchen table and we're having watermelon. I was pretty young. And this was back in the day when watermelon actually had seeds. You know, nowadays, most of the watermelons you get have these little white things that sort of pretend to be seeds. But when I was a kid, and if you get an heirloom watermelon, it'll have these. When I was a kid, that wedge of watermelon you got, the first bite of it was almost half seeds. And you sort of learned how to move everything around in your mouth and spit out the seeds and swallow the fruit. And the first time I spit out the seeds on the plate, my grandfather, he looked down at me and he said, you know, you can spit those up in the air. And I said, yeah. So you want me to teach you? I said, sure. And my mom and my grandmother immediately got up from the table and went in the kitchen, because they knew it was going to happen. And my grandfather, he taught me how to, you don't actually spit them. You kind of use your mouth to blow them out up into the air. And you put the seed on your tongue, get one seed and make an O, and you go, and the air propels the seed up. And he actually taught me how to do it so well. We started sticking the seeds to the ceiling in the dining room, which is probably another reason my grandmother and my mom went into the kitchen. And we got this whole constellation of watermelon seeds up on the ceiling. And when we were all done and we'd eaten as much watermelon as we could and spit all the watermelon seeds we could, my grandfather taught me another important lesson, which was to clean up after yourself. And he gave me one of those paper cups, the Dixie cups. This was in the summer, and my mom often used throwaway cups to save on washing dishes. And so he gave me one of the Dixie cups, and then he held me up, gave me around the waist and held me up into the air. So when he held me up, I could actually reach the ceiling and take all the seeds off the ceiling and put them into the cup. And he taught me how to clean up. And I could still remember, you know, I'm 65 years old. I can still remember what it felt like to have my grandfather hold me up and take those seeds down. You know, there's lots of things that remind me of my grandfather. You see this ring actually on my finger. This was my grandfather's wedding ring. he wore it for 62 years. That's how long he and Graham were married. And Grandpa and I, we were born 2 days and 50 years apart. I was born April 4th, 1955. He was born April 2nd, 1905. And being born so close to April Fool's Day, as you could tell by him teaching me how to spit watermelon seeds, he was kind of into tricks. I had a lot of fun with Grant growing up. And after he passed away, we kind of met down at the Cape and told stories about him. And one of the things he taught me growing up was how to go fishing and how to go clamming, on the flats. You go clamming on the flats, you dig for these clams, soft shell clams. And he taught me, that you had to size the clams. You take your finger, you put them around, and if your fingers don't meet, then the clam is big enough to take. If your fingers meet, it's too small, you have to put it back, except for 10 Grammy clams, they were called. We were allowed to only get 10 clams. They were too small because his wife, my grandmother, liked them that way. And that was okay, but any more than that was not okay. So we decided to have a big clam feast in honor of my grandfather. And we got all these weird boats together. There was a kayak, there was a canoe, there was a rowboat, there was one little boat with a putt-putt motor on it, and a sailfish. And we went over to the flats way down at the end of the harbor to get clams. And we were digging clams, and it's gotten harder to dig clams now than it used to be. There's a lot of big ones and not as many medium-sized ones and a ton of small ones. And we were digging, and we had a lot of people to feed. We had 2 licenses, so we could get 2 buckets. But we weren't getting enough big clams. And I said, we got to take more than 10 small ones. It's okay. Gramps not here. He won't mind. And we didn't notice as soon as I said that, we were digging the clams. We didn't take a ton of small ones, but we took more than 10. And we were getting the buckets filled up. And it had been a nice day when we started digging clams. But after I said that, it started getting cloudier and the wind started picking up. And when we finished and backfilled our holes, which you're supposed to do, we were trudging back to the boats with our buckets, and the wind kicked around and it smelled like rain, and then it was raining, and the wind was hard, and it was coming straight from where we were supposed to go. The putt-putt motor was going to have no trouble. Everybody else got in their boats and they're going back rowing or canoeing or trying to sail. We were going backwards, not going forwards, and then it started to hail. The hail was coming really hard, and my niece was in the back of my boat, and someone put a sweatshirt around her to protect her from the hail. And my cousin Daryl, who was in the motorboat, was trying to go from one boat to another and toss us lines. He was thinking about pulling us back, and he looked up and he said, "Gramp, we're sorry. We're sorry. We took too many small clams. We won't do it again now. Cut it out." And as soon as he said that, it stopped raining. The hail stopped and the wind turned right around and started blowing from the opposite direction. And I didn't have to row. I was in the rowboat. I didn't have to row because that wind pushed me right up in front of the cabin. And I got out. And I tell you, I have never taken more than 10 small clams since that time. And that's the closest I get to a true life ghost story. So thanks for listening. Thanks for singing. And thanks to the library for having me. Have a great Halloween. And please share your favorite story with somebody else.
I will.
Thanks.
Well, thank you for performing. Thank you for those who attended. And have a great night, everyone.